Defending Israel with David Harris is made possible in part by Barbara and Bob Goodkind, the Paul and Lynn Light Family Foundation, To Life, to Love, the Patricia Worthen Ullman Foundation.
Hello JBS viewers, I'm David Harris and welcome back to Defending Israel. For regular viewers of this show, you know that particularly since October the 7th, I've been focused on organizations that deal with not just well-intentioned output, but concrete outcome. Organizations like ISCAP, the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, United Nations Watch, the International Legal Forum, and an organization that I want to talk with you about today, thanks to our guest, NGO Monitor. Our guest is the Vice President of NGO Monitor, based in Israel, Olga Deutsch. Olga, welcome.
Thank you so much, David, for having me.
So I must say initially that you and I have known each other for not quite 20 years, but I knew you in an earlier phase of your life. You were from Serbia, from Belgrade, and you were the president of the European Union of Jewish Students. That's where we first met.
That's where we first met, and that's where I first decided, and I stick to my story, that you're one of the greatest Jewish leaders. You were always able to motivate and inspire and give hope, and you continue to do that until today.
I have to tell viewers that's not why I invited Olga onto the show, but thank you. So why don't you pick up the story from you were president of the European Union of Jewish Students, you were living in your native land, Serbia, and today you're vice president of NGO Monitor, living with your family in Israel. What happened from then till now?
Well, obviously, my passions led me to becoming a Jewish leader, as weird that word is, right? Because I always felt, and unfortunately that feeling remains with me today as well, that we still have a lot to defend, both internally and externally. I focus, and that was my greatest passion when I was the chair of the European Union of Jewish Students as well, the connection between our Jewishness and the State of Israel, and the centrality of that there is actually no Jewish identity today without an extremely strong bond and pride that any one of us should have about the State of Israel. At some point, I decided to make Israel my home because I felt that, sadly, Europe was already back then becoming a less welcome place for Jews. It started on universities and in parliaments, right, in certain policies and resolutions, but it was clear to me even then that it will trickle down relatively quickly. And in historic terms, it has, because 20 years is not a very long time. And I am, until today, blamed, if you'd like, that I was one of the most Zionist chairs of the European Union of Jewish Students, which I think is both emblematic of the crisis of the Jewish community around the world, but also very representative of where I'm coming from, and I remain there. So it was no wonder that I ended up at an organization such as NGO Monitor that puts center stage, basically defending Israel's right to exist, just focusing on the human rights space.
Okay, let's stop there. NGO Monitor was created in the early 2000s. Why? Because I think there was a specific link to the Durban Conference. And since the Durban Conference was 24 years ago, viewers would probably have to be 40 years and older to even know what the Durban Conference was, much less why it would trigger the creation of a new organization. Tell us about it.
It's actually a very symbolic date for me because the Durban Conference was the reason why I got involved in the European Union of Jewish Students. It was the first event that I attended, and they were getting ready to send a student delegation to Durban, to the UN conference. And now I lead an organization that was created in the aftermath of the Durban Conference. Basically,
what happened in Durban that triggered this reaction?
In 2001, the UN held a major conference in South Africa to discuss how we should fight as the world racism. But very quickly, in a parallel NGO, non-governmental organizations summit that gathered hundreds of major organizations, many of whom all of us know, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, Oxfam, that enjoy tremendous respect and integrity in the broader public. Very quickly, that turned into an anti-Israel and anti-Semitic rally. Today, we refer to the Durban Conference as basically the beginning of the BDS movement, because this is where not only Zionism is racism was revamped and institutionalized, but the methodology that NGOs and the human rights organizations will be the main vehicle of promoting Zionism is racism mantra of the global anti-Israel movement. I think that the BDS doesn't serve it justice anymore in explaining it.
So, a gentleman named Gerald Steinberg, I hope you'll explain who he is, witnessed what happened and said we need an organization to focus on this space.
Exactly. So Professor Gerald Steinberg, who is still the president of NGO Monitor, literally took a sabbatical of a year and said there is something weird here. How come all these
He was a professor of what, just to be clear?
He was actually a professor of nuclear physics in the beginning. Dealt the best part of his life with nuclear proliferation, and only later on pivoted into international relations and politics. And he paused for a second and said, someone has to look into this anomaly. It's a logical tautology, right? That the major human rights organizations are blaming Israel and the only Jewish state and the very fact that it exists as a Jewish homeland as the source of all evil in the world. He thought he would be doing it for a year, and here we are, 24 years later, with a full-blown organization based in Israel that was created and continues to be a research organization. Our mandate is to collect facts and figures, all based on open source information, because ultimately we say that is the ultimate weapon that we have. That is the only thing that no one can dispute. And I always say open source is just a fancy word for Googling it, if you'd like. Because when I sit in front of elected officials and they ask me, why don't you use special tools or search engines? I say, because if I can Google it, so should you. Meaning everyone should be able to just do basic due diligence before we blindly trust when Human Rights Watch says that Israel is an apartheid state, or Amnesty International says that we are committing genocide, right? Or when they file a lawsuit against UK or the Dutch government, evoking exactly those libels in order to prevent them to supply Israel with arms when Israel needs it the most after October the 7th. And this is already to sort of tell you that this systemic weaponization of human rights, of which NGOs are just the main vehicle, right, is, to my mind, one of the most existential battlefields for the Jewish people, because that is the one that feeds into the rest of the narratives that are being spread. And we are talking today on November the 4th in New York City. I understand the program will be aired later on when everyone will already know the results of the mayoral race here. But I find it typically worrying and emblematic that I am in New York having this conversation with you, as I hope all of us are mortified that Mamdani might win, because it is exactly, he is the product of that weaponization that took place in the last 20 years. When you have someone who twists the truth to make it sound like justice, and that doesn't focus, like all extremists, doesn't focus on the issue, right? And policies that actually affect New Yorkers or Jewish New Yorkers, the biggest Jewish community outside of Israel, but turns it into this emotional and relative thing, then we have a big problem.
So, but Olga, I'm old enough to remember when Human Rights Watch, for example, one of the groups you named, was founded by Robert Bernstein. And it was founded in response to the Helsinki Final Agreement of 1975, with a focus on what was going on in the Soviet Union, behind the Iron Curtain. What happened? What happened to these respected names like Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, Oxfam, the groups you mentioned and others? Where did they go off the rails? Do you have an explanation? Is there one explanation? Are there multiple explanations? What went wrong?
Well, first of all, the original people, the founder, is no longer involved for a very long time. He himself denounced the group and criticized it for its inherent bias and obsessiveness, actually, with Israel and with Jews, and their continuous inability to actually address the rise of anti-Semitism, even beyond Israel and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I think that these groups, when they become too big and too mighty, and it is worth mentioning that some of these organizations have budgets larger than smaller countries like Macedonia, right? So you can imagine the power that they hold. I think they become machines, and when placed in wrong hands, and then also in the context of the global discourse that becomes more progressive, more exclusive and divisive in general, then, like so many others, they pick on and decide in advance who is the villain and who is the victim, and they're blinded by it. Then they also, by now, don't really have employees who could even question them, although we have seen in the last couple of years more and more employees from all of these organizations coming out, and especially after October the 7th, and speaking out and saying there is bias. We were not even allowed to ask questions, but they're all being silenced.
Is there funding that NGO Monitor suspects going from bad places to these organizations, or is that not part of the story?
Well, most of these groups are not really transparent, which is typical of the entire NGO industry or community, whatever you want to call it. I always say that the principles or the values that we apply in other policy areas, whether it's from our public officials or business leaders, we somehow completely throw through the window when we talk about the civil society, as if the fact that any one of these groups declares itself as a human rights group should absolve them or any accountability and responsibility. There were reports that there was some Qatari funding going into Human Rights Watch, but we don't really know where they get their funding, how much, and for which projects. But they don't operate in silos. They're the biggest ones, and they have this sort of a halo, right? That they are immediately reported on in the primetime media. They dictate the discourse, but they have an army of smaller, also self-declared human rights organizations that then take it even further and make it even more radical. Some of them are basically NGO proxies of Palestinian terror organizations, and particularly after October the 7th, here in this city, with all the violence on campuses and demonstrations on streets, I think that there was more of an awareness that NGOs and charities and these groups are oftentimes the main driving force behind the violence, and there's absolutely no transparency. Who gets a charitable status? How does the IRS in the US investigate that? And where does the money go to?
Okay, so enter NGO Monitor as the group that was established to try and focus on this. I said at the outset that particularly after October 7th, my main attention is on those organizations that are producing not just well-intentioned output, trips, reports, polls, but outcomes. NGO Monitor has had some serious outcomes. Talk to us about a couple of examples of NGO Monitor's impact.
Well, you're right. We always say we don't research for the sake of research. We want and we make our research and reports available to policymakers. Why? And this is important that the audience understands. A lot of these groups are actually funded through your viewers' taxpayers' money, which is the biggest unbelievable thing. It is development and aid, humanitarian aid funds that governments, particularly in Europe, but there were cases also of USAID and State Department funding, even in the last couple of years, that went to US-based charities that then were giving out cash aid allowances in Gaza together with Hamas ministry that was helping them put together.
So your job is to research this and bring this to the attention of the appropriate governments and parliaments, and with what results? With
two main goals. Number one, to get them to cut funding to such problematic groups, whether they're anti-Semitic, terror affiliated, etc. And in the last decade alone, our research helped cut at least $200 million in governmental aid monies alone.
$200 million as a result
NGOs.
Of NGO monitors research.
And I say at least because, again, as I said, there's very little transparency about this, so you don't even always know, right, how much was the original grant to this organization or where it was cut. Sometimes it takes years to read somewhere that funding was cut to a group. But that is not even our biggest impact, because it sounds nice, right? And I think for all of us in this community, it's important to be able to put an impact and a number on our work. But it's a one-off, meaning if you don't teach the system how it even ended up in a situation that it chose a terror-affiliated organization to deliver aid or promote human rights, then it might not fund this one because you just alerted them to it, but it will fund another one. So a much more important thing that we try to do is get the governments to change policies on how they choose the organizations, how they vet them, how they control them during the granting period. If there is a breach in the contract that they signed, what is the sanction? Most of the times there is no sanction. And then finally, because this is all on the side of the executive body, how do our elected officials, whether it is here or in Europe, execute their parliamentary oversight? Because most of them don't even have enough information to have an informed conversation, right, with the executive branches and to ask right questions. Most of the times when elected officials are presented with our research, they are shocked and surprised. So in the last 5 years alone, more than 25 governments actually tweaked and tightened their vetting mechanisms. But I can share
as a result of
our work.
Of your work. Are you able to give one or two concrete examples?
For sure. Let me focus on what has been going on since October the 7th. I think it is the most representative and urgent to all of us. After the massacre took place, most European governments immediately wanted to run internal investigations and make sure that none of their taxpayers' money went to terror in any way. So we proactively shared our reports with a lot of them, and the European Union, for example, as a result of one such report of ours cut 22 million euros in funding to Palestinian NGOs, which is a lot of money to
Because those NGOs were? Because
those NGOs simply did not condemn October the 7th massacre. That was the question. The question of what was their reaction to October the 7th. And when I tell you what we did, you will probably shrug or laugh, because we basically provided a list of social media accounts and tweets, right, and posts systematically on those days, and showed how they did not acknowledge or condemn, and in most cases they welcomed it and sometimes glorified it. And
again, these organizations in the meantime were receiving public funds
from the European Union.
From the European Union.
Millions of euros.
Okay.
But the more important thing is that as a result of that, not only did they cut funding, but they decided that they need to add an anti-incitement clause or condition in the contracts between the European Union and Palestinian NGOs, which tells you two things. It did not exist before that, meaning the European Union was not checking whether any of the Palestinian NGOs were inciting. And now that they did check, or we checked, they felt compelled to do that. And to make
Did you meet resistance within the EU, or was it smooth sailing?
No, there's always resistance. There is a resistance.
Was it a country resistance, a bureaucratic resistance? Was it ideologically
There
driven?
is both. There is a bureaucratic existence as anywhere to any type of change, or any bureaucrat, when told that they did something wrong, the first response is cannot be, you're wrong. There is also ideological resistance because, sadly, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is only and solely viewed in political and through politicized lenses. And even if it's a pure case of terror or incitement, somehow in the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, it becomes a political issue. So there's also a lot of ideology.
So, for example, have you met through NGO Monitor with the government of Ireland or the government of Spain, the most implacable foes of Israel, particularly since October the 7th, or will they not even meet with you?
Well, honestly, we don't try to meet with them.
Okay. Because it's a lost cause?
It's a lost cause and it's a waste of time. I think the European Parliament, every parliament works also differently, so you actually want to go to political groups and not just countries. But within those groups that represent political parties from each country, in each political group you want to seek out allies. So Germany has been one of the greatest allies of Israel, particularly after October the 7th. Not to say that there are no issues there, but compared to everyone else, they have been really steadfast. Even the Dutch, but the Spanish and the Irish and the French, they have been, or the Belgian, they have been some of the greatest critiques of Israel and spearheading the campaign against Israel. And a lot of it actually in conjunction with NGOs. And it's important that your viewers understand it's not just that money was embezzled, right? Or that it went into the wrong hands. It is really the Palestinian NGOs that call themselves human rights groups are the main driving force behind every libel that we have seen materialize after October the 7th. 3 days after October the 7th, Palestinian NGOs, by the way, the three NGOs that the US State Department designated in September, Al-Mazan, PCHR, and Al-Haq, they started the apartheid libel. A few days later, the genocide libel, and they took it to the first resolution at a Paris-based NGO umbrella organization. Together with them, in early November, they took it to the International Criminal Court in The Hague with the first call for arrest warrants. In January 2024, the same NGOs, Human Rights Watch and Al-Haq, were the co-authors of the South African claim at the International Court of Justice, right? And they sat on their side of the audience. And it was the same NGOs, together with Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, that were filing lawsuits to try to impose arms embargo. And I can go on and on and on.
But the point, again, for the viewers is, you're talking about organizations that are not just bad actors, but receiving funds from Western democratic countries.
To do exactly the opposite.
Right, and NGO Monitor is trying its best to blow the whistle with solid research. We just have a couple of minutes left, and I want to come back to something else you said earlier, Olga, because I know it was a few years ago, but you had a unique view of European countries as the president of the European Union of Jewish Students. After all, those are presumably the future members and leaders of European Jewry. From the vantage point of now, do you see a future for Jewish communities in Europe? I mean, where are you on the optimism, pessimism scale? And it's a big question. We just have a couple of minutes.
So I'll try to be concise. I'm always an optimist. I think in this line of work you have to be, because otherwise how do you come to the office every morning with all the hate that we witness? I think we're at a turning point in Europe. It's going to take years, a turning point in historical terms.
Turning point meaning what?
That Europe might still wake up. I want to hope, and we see a surge of right-wing governments and parties in Europe as the counter to the Islamization, in a way, of and this is not to say that all Muslims are bad, but there is a fact that they're mobilizing the radical forces and trying to override what is European or Western or US set of values.
But some would quickly say, but wait a second, many of those right-wing forces are themselves potentially neo-Nazi or anti-Semitic.
Correct.
So are Jews trapped between those emerging forces and the left-wing and jihadist forces? How do European communities, especially the smaller ones, navigate? Serbia, for example, where you're from.
I think it's not about the Jews. It always starts with the Jews. So yes, we are caught in the middle. And I think in today's reality and geopolitical and global context, you cannot choose whoever is the elected government in that country. You work with the government, right? And then, especially when we are surrounded by foes, then when we do have allies, then we have to reach out to them and work. But always look, as we always do throughout history, back on both sides of our shoulders, because the two extremes ultimately meet when it comes to hatred of Jews, right? That's the only common denominator that far right and far left ultimately have. So it's a very peculiar and unfortunate situation for Jews and globally, but I do feel that we are at a point of overheating, and hopefully at least it will explode at some point soon, so we can start to see some sort of calming down of the...
A couple of seconds left. The first guest on this show, originally from Serbia. How many Jews in Serbia today?
Around 2,000.
At the peak before the Second World War?
More than 30,000. More than 30,000, and actually one of the most important countries for Israel in Europe right now.
Right now.
Viewers should know that they're the only country that was sending ammunition to Israel since October the 7th, where every other country, including Germany, imposed an arms embargo on Israel.
And if we were to meet again in 10 years, would those 2,000 Jews, do you think, be more or fewer?
Fewer, sadly.
Because?
Because we don't have, as the Jewish community, we still haven't deciphered how to teach Judaism, how to teach Jewish pride and a deep, profound connection to who we are without labeling it religious, secular, reform, this or that. And I think we've seen, sadly, the results of that after October the 7th in inability of our youth to stand up and defend themselves, not by their own fault. And I think that is one of the largest challenges that we have today.
Well, maybe some will follow you and make Aliyah, and we'll see what happens. Olga, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. JBS viewers, you have been listening to Olga Deutsch, Vice President of Israel-based NGO Monitor. To get information, where do viewers go?
NGO/monitor.org.
NGO Monitor. NGO slash or dash?
Dash is like
dash.
A minus.
Not that. Dash. Horizontal.
The Serbs.
NGO-monitor at
the org.
org. Thank you for watching. I'm David Harris, and looking forward to seeing you again on the next airing of Defending Israel. Bye-bye.